Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice, and I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Naila Khalida May. Dr. Khalida May is the principal investigator of the Black and Free Research Creation Project, a Dorothy Killam Fellow, the Tier 2 SSHRC Canada Research Chair in Race, Gender, and Performance, an accomplished multidisciplinary artist, and an associate professor at the University of Waterloo. She is also the author of Performing Female Blackness, a book just out from Wilfrid Laurier University Press that examines what private and public performances of female blackness reveal about race, gender, and nation. The title uses a fascinating and effective mashup of scholarship, poetry, performance, and lived experience to explore Black expressive culture in a variety of settings. I'm excited to share that during this interview, Dr. Khalida May employs some of the techniques she uses in her books by responding to some of my questions with song and poetry. So put your listening ears on and tune into this 4-part series, which is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. In this second episode, we take a closer look at Dr. Khalida May's book, including how she uses lived experience, the importance of regional influence, and why the personal is the political. So I'm particularly struck by your decision to open the book by acknowledging your pregnancy at the time, and the transitions that you knew it required for yourself and for your child. I mean, I thought it was such a perfect way to illustrate how identity and the perception of it feed into the way that a person carries themselves in the world. Can you expand on that? How is the personal the political?
It felt like I understood it as a risk as I was writing it and thinking of it and of including it.
What was risky about that?
Well, who is asked to explain who they are?
Mm.
Like, who gets to just be a person and do the research or whatever that may be, and who has to always position themselves and assert their humanity, often through the demonstration of some kind of pain, right? And evocation of empathy, like that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So I was cognizant of the ways in which it does that and could be read and understood as that.
Mm.
So I was going to write it regardless because it's what I needed to say. And much of my writing lives and will forever live in my journals, and that's that. But they are expressed in those places. And, journals that I have requested loved ones to burn upon my death too, right?
Right.
Because they're just there for me to process, because writing is one of the ways that I process.
Sure.
So I was going to write it regardless so that I could process it, but the question is to include it in an academic space
Mm.
and make those thoughts subject to scrutiny, and then to use them as well to do some theoretical or do some work. So there's the risk of that. There is the thinking about what it means for us, like that, knowing that my children will be able to read those words at some point, and what is the legacy of that
Mm-hmm.
on a very personal, intimate level. Like, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the parts of it that say, like, you're not serious as an academic if you're talking about and positioning yourself in that way, and the many ways in which women are already, like, gendered. Black women, Black queer women are already marginalized. So I was cognizant of all of those aspects of it. And I also just wanted to write my book and the thing that I felt called to write, as much as I know that even the construction of how I manifest that call to write is indicative of all of the training and experiences I've had. And, those include a deep foundation in European white Western standards. So
Mm.
I have to even interrogate how the impetus manifests at all time. What is the medium? Um, so all of those things were at play. Those were the risks,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the kind of thinking around that decision.
Hmm. Okay. So, sort of riffing on that a little bit, can you describe a little bit your intent behind using yourself as both a researcher and a subject for your book? I mean, you kind of talked about this a little bit just now, but how did that help you write your book?
That combining of researcher, scholar, or artist hyphen scholar, that's something that I have been working with and researching at this point now, like since the mid 2000s,
Mm.
if not earlier. I mean, but formally, certainly with my PhD work, so kind of 2007, and worked with Helene Foster's colleague of mine, who I did grad school with. We did a conference session on that. Like, what does it mean to try to exist in the hyphen between artist and scholar, to try to bridge these worlds, these ways of thinking that for some of us are not separate, that they are coexisting, while being attentive to those of us for whom it does swing more to the academic side or more to the artistic side. Like, how do we also think of that hyphen as a bridge? And
Mm.
what can we do if we bring these modes of engaging, right, with the world and thinking about the world and life and quality of life? Um, how do we bring them together?
Mm.
So this way of thinking and approaching and kind of positioning myself has long been something that I've been writing about and thinking about, and conferencing about, throughout my work for many years. And I guess in that regard, performing female Blackness is, brings all of that together in some ways, and advances it, like helps me to think through and work through it. Yeah. So that positioning of myself in the work is also something I've been doing for as long as I've been making art.
Mm.
So I've been writing, for decades now as a child. So, and performing and recording albums and writing plays and writing poems and performing and all of that. And so, and I've been part of that. Like, thinking of and understanding myself has always been a part of my work.
Hmm. Have you sort of come to terms in a sense, I suppose, with the idea that kind of using that hyphen or living in that space with the hyphen, connecting the artistic with the academic, and um, I imagine there's a little bit of vulnerability there in terms of like expressing yourself in an artistic way in a scholarly or academic kind of context. Like, I'm wondering if you've over the years become more confident in that, or you still sort of feel like that's a stretch or a reach to kind of combine those formats in a title such as this.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there is vulnerability. I think of it as fear, right? But that is, also the two can coexist. And so I think there are many emotions to describe it.
Mm.
Um, but there is that. And I would say, though, that it's the same thing that ultimately like drove my decision to start the book where I start the book with that letter. And
Mm.
it's that I've had moments in my artistic process where, and just art making, where I've been terrified of saying a poem out loud. A poem that would, like, some of the times the poems will spill out of me and I feel like I'm trying to catch them on the page or on the screen. And I've had poems like that where the what came out was more than I was ready to say publicly. I actually write about one of them, those moments in the book with This Is My Rant. That was one of those pieces where it just came out and I was trying to catch it all. And then afterwards, I read it and I was like, "Whoa, I'm not touching that with the 10-foot pole." Like, mm-mm. So, but then knowing, like, well, then I must say it. That there is something about my understanding of myself as an artist that is also the sign to say it, to
Mm.
do it, to step into that and live that, and to face the fear and face the vulnerability, the error, the risk of failure, of public failure, like to risk all of those things because in out of respect for the strength of the impetus, the clarity of the call.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So generally, Canada features pretty heavily in your work. And how do you bring the influence of region or country into your work? Like, what is that? How does that factor into it?
Mm. Thinking through, those are terms that are so complex for Black people.
Mm.
Region, country. So I come to be born on these lands and to understand myself in these spaces as someone coming from a lineage that questions country, or for whom country is complicated, and region complex, and homelands unknown
Mm.
with specificity. And so that's what I hope to think through and work through in performing female Blackness. Those kinds of questions and wanting to position and understand and reposition within that context.
Hmm. You just heard from Dr. Naila Khalida May. Dr. Khalida May is the principal investigator of the Black and Free Research Creation Project, a Dorothy Killam Fellow, the Tier 2 SSHRC Canada Research Chair in Race, Gender, and Performance, an accomplished multidisciplinary artist, and an associate professor at the University of Waterloo. She is the author of Performing Female Blackness, a book just out from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. This episode is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Join us next week when we talk about how Dr. Khalida May uses a variety of stylistic formats, such as poetry, song, and play excerpts, that accompany the typical academic sections of the book. In other words, how a poem might further an idea or allow for a particular kind of analysis. We're also treated to a clip of her song Free from her album Firewoman. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.